Good evening and welcome to the December meeting of the Cabarrus County Board of Education. It is my honor and privilege at this time to introduce Judge Hamby, who will come forward and swear in the newly elected board members of the Cabarrus County Board of Education. Judge Hamby.
All right, if first we could have Ms. Carolyn Carpenter. And any members of her family who wish to join her. Please hold that with your left hand and raise your right. Do you, Carolyn Carpenter, solemnly and sincerely swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and that you will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the state of North Carolina and to the constitutional powers and authorities which are or may be established for the government thereof, and that you will endeavor to support, maintain, and defend the Constitution of said state, not inconsistent with the Constitution of the United States, to the best of your knowledge and ability, so help you God?
I do.
And do you, Carolyn Carpenter, also swear that you will well and truly execute the duties of the office of Cabarrus County Board of Education member according to the best of your skill and ability, according to law, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And next, Mr. Tim Furr. And any member of his family who wishes to join him. If you will hold the Bible in your left hand and raise your right. Do you, Tim Furr, solemnly and sincerely swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and that you will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the state of North Carolina and to the constitutional powers and authorities which are or may be established for the government thereof, and that you will endeavor to support, maintain, and defend the Constitution of said state, not inconsistent with the Constitution of the United States, to the best of your knowledge and ability, so help you God?
I do.
And do you, Tim Furr, swear that you will well and truly execute the duties of the office of Cabarrus County Board of Education member according to the best of your skill and ability, according to law, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations. Both copies. Now Vince Powell. And any member of your family who wishes to join you. If you will hold the Bible with your left hand and raise your right. Do you, Vince Powell, solemnly and sincerely swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States, that you will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the state of North Carolina and to the constitutional powers and authorities which are or may be established for the government thereof, and that you will endeavor to support, maintain, and defend the Constitution of said state, not inconsistent with the Constitution of the United States, to the best of your knowledge and ability, so help you God.
I do.
And do you, Vince Powell, swear that you will well and truly execute the duties of the office of Cabarrus County Board of Education member according to the best of your skill and ability, according to law, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
If I could get you to sign both of those copies.
I'm sorry, did you say one or two?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to all of you. This is the one meeting of the year where I open and very quickly turn it over as soon as you have finished your actions of organization. And tonight, I'd like to, at this time, open the floor for nominations for Chairman of our Board of Education.
Mr. Superintendent.
Might not be there.
Mr. Superintendent, it's with great pleasure that I nominate our colleague Barry Shoemaker to be chair of our board.
Is there a second to that motion?
Mr. Superintendent, it's with no less honor that I second the nomination.
And are there any other nominations for chair? Then I would entertain at this time a motion to close the nominations for board chair.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And at this time, I would offer the name of Barry Shoemaker as board chair from December 1 of 2014 until the first board meeting in December of 2015. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed likewise. Congratulations, Mr. Shoemaker. The meeting is now yours.
Board members, at this time, I will be taking nominations for the position of Board Vice Chair.
Mr. Chair, with no less honor, I nominate Dr. Jeff Phillips as Vice Chair.
Do I have a second to that nomination?
Yes, I'll second that.
Are there any other nominations for Vice Chair? Hearing none, I'll need a motion to close the session, or the vote for Vice Chair, and Mr. Phillips will be our nominee. Do I have a,
Oh, guess I'll make that motion.
okay, and do I have a second? Okay. All in favor of Dr. Phillips as the Board Vice Chair for this upcoming year, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay. Mr. Phillips, you are now our new Vice Chair. Need my glasses. Before I begin, I would like to thank Officer Thousand for serving tonight as our officer on duty, and he is the resource officer at Mount Pleasant, and appreciate you coming out and giving us your time tonight, sir. Our first order of business, board, is to set the agenda. Do I have any motions?
Move to accept the agenda.
And do I have a second to that? Second. Okay. All in favor of the agenda as proposed, say aye.
Aye.
All right. So all opposed? Okay. Moving forward, we have the Code of Ethics. So if we will take some time out, Mr. Enrique will present the Code of Ethics so that our listening audience will understand it.
Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. So Board Policy 2120 sets out a code of ethics for school board members. And every 2 years when we swear in new members, it's an opportunity to review that code of ethics. And I've handed out copies so everyone can execute it after we've reviewed them. It is something that's required by law. You have to have a code of ethics. And I know many of you have been serving for a while, but it's always a good reminder of the ethical points that we need to follow. The policy, and I'll go over the document in front of you in a minute, but there are kind of 5 guiding principles that the board has adopted under Policy 2120. The first is obeying state and federal law. The second is upholding the integrity and independence of the board member's office. The third is avoiding impropriety. The fourth is faithful performance of duty. And then lastly, conducting the affairs of the board in an open and public manner. And so based on those principles, we have the Code of Ethics, which is adopted as part of that process. And I just want to briefly review it. I know you have it there, but for our viewing audience, I'll review the key elements that each board member needs to follow. The first is exerting leadership and direction in reaching the board's educational goals. As many of you know, and again, I congratulate those of you that have recently been sworn in, the board sets the policy and guidance for the school system. And so exerting that leadership and deciding where we need to go and where we need to be is fundamental in the board's role and is your role as board members. Secondly, we recognize that a board's member's responsibility is not to run the schools, but to see that the schools are well run. And I think what's captured there is, obviously, we're a large system with a lot of employees and a lot of students. We've got a capable administration that is handling what happens at the school and at central office. The individual decisions that are being made by every employee are not something that the board needs to establish or worry about. What the board needs to do is make sure that the schools are well run, meaning that the administration's doing what it's supposed to do. The only employee the board hires is the superintendent. And so through the superintendent and his staff is how the schools are run. So the school sets that direction and leadership, but the day-to-day administration is handled by staff. Attend all regularly scheduled board meetings insofar as possible and become informed concerning issues to be considered at those meetings. You agree to recognize that you will endeavor to make policy decisions only after a full discussion at a publicly held board meeting, that you will render decisions based on the available facts and your independent judgment and refuse to surrender that judgment to individuals or special interest groups, that you recognize that authority is vested in the entire board assembled in meeting, and that an individual board member has no legal status to act for or on behalf of the board at any time. And again, so while you're here, you're acting collectively as a board. Those are the actions of the Cabarrus County School Board. You can't, although obviously you'll be talking all the time with members in the community, with staff, hearing concerns, responding to concerns. You need to remember that it's only when the board acts as a whole that it's board action. No one board member can say, oh, we'll take that action or we'll vote that down. You can talk about what you may do, but it's only the board as a whole that acts as the Board of Education. Render decisions and appeals from administrative decisions based on available facts and independent judgment and refuse to surrender that judgment. And again, once in a while, you'll serve in administrative or judicial capacity, hearing grievance appeals or other things, and I'll give you more legal advice if and when we have those types of hearings. You agree to consider and act on recommendations from the superintendent and/or his designee as to building needs. Obviously, we have some construction projects underway and more that will likely become underway during your terms as board members. You need to consider the annual budget, and that'll be taking up quite a bit of this board's time, as it does most years. Personnel and other needs necessary to enhance the educational program of the district. You agreed to encourage the free expression of opinion by all board members and seek systematic communications between the board, students, staff, and community. To work with other board members to establish effective board policies and delegate authority for administration to the superintendent of schools. Communicate to other board members expressions of public reaction to board policies and programs. Inform yourselves about educational issues by individual study and participation in programs such as those offered by the school board associations. Comply with the law requiring you get 12 hours of training each year. Elect the superintendent. You have a superintendent, and support him in the discharge of his duties and the employment of persons best qualified to serve as school staff. And insist on annual or more frequent impartial evaluation of all staff. And I'll add that part of your job as a board is to do the evaluation of the superintendent. You also agree to avoid being placed in a position of a conflict of interest or using your position on the board for personal or partisan gain. And once in a while, there may be some issue that comes up before the board where there may be a conflict. Maybe your wife works for a contractor that we're getting ready to award a bid to, or there's some other personal connection that you have. If you have a duty to both advise the board of the conflict and, if appropriate, ask to be excused from that vote. I'm happy to consult with you and the board on what might be a conflict and might not be. We can look at those issues. I think the most important thing to remember is to disclose it. It may not be a problem, but don't say, it may be a conflict, but I'm just not going to mention it. Then you can get challenged later. Hey, why did you vote in favor of that bid knowing that your wife owned the company? It's better to disclose it, and we can discuss openly and publicly, is it something that is a conflict or not? So I think that's something to just keep in mind. Anytime that we're voting on something, you say, hey, I've got a personal interest in this, or it's something that my family or a relative or someone I care about is going to benefit from what I'm doing. You agree to refer complaints to the superintendent or his designee. Obviously, you're members of the public. Your contact information's on the website. You'll be in the grocery store and someone will come and raise a concern. Hey, did you know what's happening at this school? Did you hear about what happened to that student? The appropriate thing to do is say, I'm troubled by that. Let me refer that to the superintendent so that he can look into it. And it's certainly appropriate to ask the superintendent to report back to the board what's been done. But what's not appropriate is to say, I'm going to handle that, conduct your own investigation, come forward and say, I've looked into this and we're going to fire Sally so-and-so. That would not be your role as board members. The idea is refer complaints to the superintendent, let them be investigated, and then obviously you can follow up and make sure appropriate action is being taken. Present personal criticisms of a confidential nature about individual school employees only to the superintendent and in private. Personnel information is confidential in nature. We don't want public criticisms of individual employees. If you've got concerns, you can bring those to the superintendent, and that can be done privately. You agree to take no private action that will compromise the Board of Administration or administration and respect confidentiality of information that's privileged under applicable law. Again, there are laws that protect confidential student information, and sometimes the board will go into closed session to hear information about a specific student. There's laws protecting confidential personnel information. So if you're entertaining a grievance or disciplinary hearing, we would do those in closed session. There are laws protecting attorney-client privilege. So if I need to give you advice about what the law is, or you have questions about what the law is, we can do those things in closed session, and you're agreeing to respect the privilege and preserve the confidentiality of that information. And then lastly, remember that your first and greatest concern is the educational welfare of the students attending the public schools. And I've been impressed in 20-some years of working for this board how the boards over the years have consistently put the needs of the students of Cabarrus County first, and I know that that's something this board will do as well. And I certainly thank you on behalf of the community for the long service that many of you have had, and look forward to new service for those of you that are rejoining or joining the board for the first time. So, anybody have any questions about the Code of Ethics or anything you want clarification on or have a question about? If not, if at some point you can sign those during the meeting and just pass them down, I keep those in our file.
Was there a way to change that first sentence that says, instead of my local school board, to Cabarrus County Board of Education?
We could specifically say Cabarrus, right? This is based on a model suggested by the School Board Association, which is why it's more general language. But if you want to say the Cabarrus County School Board, in fact, you can write that in if you want. I think that'd be appropriate. And I can change it for the next time around.
Just a general question. I'm a Presbyterian, and at least there's at least one good Presbyterian and the other Presbyterian in the audience here tonight. But I often ask our minister, why do I have to take communion so often? It's because you're a sinner. But so I appreciate this reminder of my duties on this board. I appreciate it brought to me time and again, and it's a good reinforcement to what we're supposed to do on this board and how we're supposed to serve the public and our children, our teachers and parents and the whole community. Can I ask, though, looking at the policy 2120 on our website, I would have expected this to be a verbatim cut and paste practically of what's on here. For example, on the website, number 11 is comply with General Statute 160A-87, which doesn't seem to be in what we're signing here. Is there any reason why there's a disparity between what we're reminding ourselves to do here and providing to you with what's on the policy, what's on the website?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is the policy 2120 is actually the recommended language from the School Board Association policy. When we first adopted this, and it's been a long time now, it says originally adopted in 91. The board actually crafted the Code of Ethics. So for example, the first couple bullets, which you'll see are different, talking about the responsibility to run the schools. That's something that this board, when we first adopted a Code of Ethics statement, said they wanted in the Cabarrus policy. You're actually free to change some of that language. This Code of Ethics is the one that was put together by the Cabarrus board. And again, I think it's also in turn based on a model from the School Board Association, but a different time. So that's
the two may be substantially equivalent for all I know, but it just doesn't seem to be exactly ticking and tying to my quick review.
Yeah. And I think the one you're signing does include all 17 points, but it includes a few extra points.
Okay. And I wouldn't mind at all if the policy committee were to consider unifying or coordinating the two different statements so that they're closer aligned. I'm sure they say the same thing, but they're not the same document to my mind. But that's just a thought. But again, thank you for bringing this to us.
Sure.
All right, board members, do you have any other questions? So we will submit these to you when we get them signed. Is that correct, Mark? Yeah. All right. Let's move on to, before we move to reports, I'd like to recognize our representative, Mr. Larry Pittman, is here to visit us tonight. Thank you, sir, for coming out. We're glad to have you here. Board members, we're moving on to our report section. Our first is 6.01, which is the salary supplement increase, and Ms. Kelly Klutz is at the podium.
Good afternoon. Good evening. On November the 3rd, I presented a request to increase supplements for our building level administration. And when I presented that request, I told you that I was going to come back to you with support to increase our teacher supplements and our the rest of our staff. So that would be, anyone else that doesn't get a supplement would be included in that other category. So the resolution that I have before you today is for staff compensation. And I'll just read a little bit of it, and then we'll comment and go to discussion and questions. So the resolution reads, whereas performance expectations for Cabarrus County teachers and staff have never been higher, whereas 2012 salary study indicated that Cabarrus County school employees receive less than similarly situated employees in nearby systems, and whereas between July 1st, 2012 and October 10, 2014, 225 teachers left to take positions with other school systems, many of which were paid more than Cabarrus County. Whereas it is necessary to provide fair and competitive wages to school employees in order to retain excellent employees and maintain and improve the quality of public schools in Cabarrus County. And then we resolve to increase our supplement schedule in the following way. This would mirror the supplement schedule that I brought to you for school administration. There would be a base of 7%. There would be positions that would be hard to hire positions. Those would include EC positions, science and math for high school. We would propose to pay them an additional 4%. There's the risk factor that was also on the administrator's supplement schedule, and that would be 4% or 7%, depending on with your 50% at risk or up to 70 or beyond 75% at risk. And then there was also the loyalty that was similar with the administration, anywhere from 2% to 10%, depending on the years of service in Cabarrus County schools. And so that would cost the system $6.2 million to put that in place. The next item, number 2, would be for staff who do not receive certified supplements, and that would be, we would ask for an increase of a 4% salary increase to move them closer to the midpoint as the salary study had recommended. We know that the salary study back in 2012, and we refer to it in our budget committee meetings and in our budget discussions, and here again in the resolutions that we've submitted, that we need 7% to get to the midpoint for our other staff. We've received 1% through these years since the salary study was completed, and we're asking for 4% in this resolution. So certainly 5% is still not to the midpoint of where we would like to be, but it would certainly make progress. So that's what we would ask for the other staff. That would cost approximately $2 million. So the total request would be $7.2 million. And at this point, I'll turn it over to the board for discussion and questions.
Board members, this is a report, so we're not going to be taking any action on this tonight, so this is a great time for you to ask Ms. Klutz a lot of questions. And Mr. Furr, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I have one question, and don't take this wrong, but is that everyone in the building?
Yes, sir. This would include everyone in the building. $7.2 million would include everyone. It would touch everyone.
Okay. That's what I want.
Thank you, Kelly. Again, for putting all this material together for us. The 7% base would again be all employees. Is that correct?
The 7% base is only going to touch our certified staff who get a
Certified
supplement.
staff. Base is for certified staff.
Correct.
Hard to hire positions, and I think C is at risk. Item number C here for 4 to 7%, that is for the at risk.
So if you're in an at-risk school and
So-
you're
Go ahead, please.
So if your school is an at-risk school and your at-risk population is 55% at risk, so you would qualify for the 4% supplement increase. If your school was 80% at risk, then you would qualify for the 7% supplement increase.
So item B and C, is there any potential or possibility of overlap? Can there be a
Absolutely.
role or position that's hard to hire as well as being in an at-risk environment?
Absolutely.
So potentially, the person in that those two categories could qualify for each of these increases.
You could be an EC teacher in a Wolf Meadow. You could be a math teacher in a Concord High. You could, yes, they do overlap.
Okay. And when I see this kind of thing, and we've talked for years and years and years that we haven't kept up with the salary needs that our staff deserve and should be getting, when I look at something like this, I want to ask, are we adding up all those years that we haven't gotten what we've tried to get for our staff? And does this document represent several years in the past where we have not been able to secure that extra funding from the county commission? Does this document represent several years of not being able to reward our staff as we should, or is it this moment in time?
This would certainly move us a whole lot closer to the point of being competitive, and I think that's where you're getting to. The salary study said we needed to be 36. We needed to increase teacher supplements 36%.
Okay.
We have increased supplements some, but we're not where we need to be. In addition, the salary study is old, and we don't really know where we are on that mark right now. We expect we're further than we thought we were. So to get a number like $6.2 million for staff would certainly, we feel like would get us a whole lot closer to competitive.
Would make up for a few years?
Would make up for a few years, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you again.
Mr. Walter?
So this is not an action item. Here,
No,
this is
it's
a
not.
report. What do we have a resolution here? What are we trying to, is this something that you want us, that would go to the county commission, or what? The format, I'm just confused with the format.
Can I speak?
Sure.
When this first came in our agenda review, it was originally an action item, but when we discussed it, it seemed a little premature to make this an action item since this board is composed of some new members who haven't been on it, and also we haven't had a chance to get our feet underneath of us. So we thought it would be best to bring this up to get the board to get familiar with not only the salary study, but what she's proposing here before we would go forward to the commissioners. I think that would only be fair to
Right,
them.
that's where I guess I was
Yeah.
going. I think we need a little more information to look at, and it'd be helpful if you could send us that, or resend us a salary study for those who haven't seen it in quite some time. I don't think Vince has seen it at all.
I believe it's on our board docs, and
Mr.
Dr. Kirk can,
I can share that
Yeah,
with the whole
okay.
board. if you don't
Yeah.
mind.
I'd like to review that again. And then again, this is a recurring expense, or will
Yes,
be a recurring
This would be.
and a significant recurring expense. But I like the way that we're trying to be consistent across the board. But yeah, I like to look at it more. I mean, these are limited funds. Is that the best way to do it or not? I'm not quite sure. I'd like to look at it a little further. And then, I guess, those are my comments for this point.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. Mr. Powell, would you like to comment, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Bear with me, please. When it says base equals 7%, is that a change from what's the current base supplement, I guess you could say?
The average supplement for a teacher, I believe, is 7.5% currently, and it's going to vary just a little bit between what an elementary or what a middle and what a high, and based on the number of years of experience, because we pay on years of experience. So when we ran the numbers to make this proposal work, we had to make sure that we weren't hurting any current teachers in our system. So I had to know what that number was. So I believe it was 7.5%, but when you add the hard to hire factors and the risk factors and the loyalty factors, then we're not hurting any teachers, we're increasing the teachers. So to answer your question more simplistically, it's more like 7.5% currently.
Okay, so if the current is a little bit over 7, and we go back below or right at 7, if they don't qualify for a hard-to-hire position or their school's not at risk and they're relatively new to the district, then they could possibly end up making less the next year as opposed to
That's a great question.
this year.
No, we would hold them harmless. We've run the numbers, and there are less than 200 people in that category, and we would just hold them at their current supplement. And then when we increase supplements or when they fell into those positions, they would increase.
So, okay, so they would not see a increase at all.
They would not see an increase at all. That's correct.
Do you know what percentage of?
200, approximately 200 over about 2,800, so.
Okay, a little less than 10. Okay, and my next question, bear with me. Actually, you answered that question. I'm assuming all administrators would fall into this as well. So,
Actually, no, our administrators do not fall into this category. They fall into the second category.
the hard to hire?
No, I'm sorry, the number 2, the second page.
I got you. Okay, so all administrators would receive a 4% salary increase. Okay, if staff were asked to move from a high incentive position to a low incentive position, would their salary change?
So we usually handle those on an individual basis. If they're requested to move, we usually hold them harmless. If they ask to move, we usually change the salary to the low. I'm assuming it's a lower salary, so we usually make that change.
Right. Where does loyalty start at what year? I'm sorry, I'm new.
No, you're fine. It starts at 5 years. 5 to 10 years, you get 2%. 10 to 15 is 4%. 15 to 20 is 6%. 20 to 25 is 8%. And greater than 25 is 10.
Okay, sorry about that. I probably could have found it.
No.
And is that loyalty to district or loyalty to school? Because I feel like if we can create loyalty to school, I think we have a little better learning environment, but
Okay.
I'm assuming it's loyalty to district.
It is to district.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Carpenter?
Now, Kelly, when you did the thing, we did the thing last meeting
Yes, ma'am.
with the APs and principals, that was retroactive back to July.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, we're not saying anything about being retroactive or anything, so this is from whenever it would be approved. Are we looking at budget year? What are we looking at?
So this figure is calculated the same way. That's a good point. So if we were to move forward, ask the commissioners for this money, and they were to give it to us today, I could make it retroactive to July the 1st. Certainly, we're captive to the money. So if the money is, you know how the county adjusted and made it retro to February 1st last time we asked for it, and that's how we paid it. So it's however the money comes down, but the way that these were calculated is based on a full year.
And that's why I was wondering, are we looking at these things budget-wise, or are we looking at it,
Right.
how are we basically looking at it? That's what I was
Yeah, full year.
wanting to find out. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Phillips?
Okay, well, in light of the Code of Ethics I just signed about conflict of interest, I have a conflict of interest because my wife is a certified staff and would fall in category number 1. So I don't feel it's appropriate for me to talk about that. but I will talk about category number 2 with the 4% increase for other staff. I think we need to be sensitive to asking the commissioners for increases for staff of similar positions that they have elsewhere in the county, and to make sure that we wouldn't be asking them to give, for instance, our electricians more money than the electricians that work for the county, and similar positions, janitorial, whatever, IT support. So it would be helpful to me if you could come up with a side-by-side comparison of some of those positions where there are similar jobs in the county and in our school system, and show that with a 4% increase, would we be equivalent, behind, ahead? And perhaps we need to make some adjustments there. And then just the other thing I would say, just in terms of timing, $8.2 million is a lot to ask for, and we're not the only board that's reorganizing tonight. The commissioners are reorganizing. I think it would be bad form for us in our very first meeting or right after that to go to the brand-new Board of Commissioners and say, we need $8.2 million. And, oh, by the way, we also have something else here later on buildings that we need money on. And so I think it would be best to perhaps have give their board time to get acclimated to their positions and what their financial situation looks like, and then perhaps have a joint meeting of the two boards to say, how do we handle this? Do you want it to come in our next year's budget request? Could you accommodate some of it this year to help with the staff that's on board this year? So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I have a couple questions, Kelly. First is, you've obviously used a type of rubric for number 1, similar to what the principal rubric. Could you, share that with the board later on in an email or something, so we can have that document to look at? And as we go forward to discuss this, I think it would be nice for us to all be on the same page with that particular activity. On the salary study, we know that the salary study is dated, and in the salary study, part of the executive summary had stated that usually you do salary studies about every 5 to 7 years. However, we're 3 years out from this salary study, and we've really taken no action on it, very minimal action, at least at the local level. So have we considered updating this study, and where are we on that? And would that be something that would be available to us by the budget session, by the time we finish our budgeting, so that we could actually have a more accurate number to give to the commissioners to let them know what the amount really is, rather than giving them a partial look and then having to come back and confuse them? I'd rather give them something more that would be a better look at where we are on the salary schedule, which would then also help answer Dr. Phillips' question about where are we on our craft people and our custodians in comparison to the county, because I know the county was a part of our original salary study. They were included in that study.
Yes, sir. We have looked into a quote to see what it would take to update our salary schedule or salary study. We were not happy with the initial price that came back, and so we're working to get a different figure to bring to you. So once we're comfortable with a figure that we can bring to you, we'll present that to you. We do feel it's necessary to update the salary study and have that in time for the budget committee and budget presentations, but we feel that's a valuable piece of information. The original salary study, as I recall, was approximately between $40,000 and $50,000, and we're not needing to do a lot of the job descriptions. We're just needing to do the updating. So we feel like we should be able to get it for a reasonable price or amount of money.
Yes, Ms. Carpenter.
Is there any way, and you may have this figure right off, if only A, B, and C was done, do you have a total what that amount would be if D was not done?
No, ma'am, but I can get it for you.
Okay,
I can
I
send
was
it to
just
you.
curious. I mean, of course, everybody would like to do the whole thing.
Sure.
But if it was kind of saying, okay, we might could do maybe this right now or not this,
Okay.
if maybe we could get a total for that. I was just thinking maybe, and then maybe D could be done at a later
Later.
time. But if you could do that, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, Mr. Furr.
Yeah, I should have thought about this earlier, but Dr. Phillips brought up some good points that kind of gave me some interest. But since we're near budget time, what are we, 3 months away?
We've started on our end. We've
Right.
Not been.
And why are we, not only this, but some of the other items I see on here that we're talking about money, why would we not wait till budget time and prioritize as needed, like you normally do during budget times? Why are we jumping in? I mean, it's like he said, you know, those commissioners are meeting tonight, and every other board in Cabarrus County that wants funds are going to be,
Sure.
you know, I don't know how that's what kind of relationship we're going to start out with.
Right,
And
and
that
that's-
kind of concerns me a little bit that, you know, there's been damage before, and it's almost like, okay, we're just waiting for a new group, and here we come. And why are we not waiting till budget time, I guess, is my simple question.
I think there's a couple of reasons. One is we did pull it from an action to a report, so that's part of it. The second reason is that this has been a budget request for multiple years, and what we found is that it's not been effective. And that a budget resolution or a salary resolution has been more effective. It's the only thing that has been effective for us. So, and it's the board's decision. We're giving you the tools and the information and sharing that with you. We made I think I made a promise to our staff and our teachers that I would fight. And so fight for them as well as administration. And I don't want to let them down. And so, and I know you do, you want to fight for them too. So I'm not suggesting that you
Well, I
don't. You
know.
don't.
You know, when I was on the board before, you know, I voted against that salary study, you know, first because we were not going to be able to do what we wanted to do. And to
Right.
me, we were sending a false information, like, yeah, we want to help you, but we can't help you. And from what you just told me, we haven't done anything in 3 years. Is that what you said? Based on,
We did
What
get
the
a
little
one.
bit. Yeah, I know
we did
about
get
the
a
one.
1%.
yeah, but, so I just want to make sure when we go guns blazing this time, that we can get some results. And, you know, a lot of times it's all about timing.
It is.
But of course, you know, I think all of us sitting up here, we want, you know, you guys, teachers, you know, the most underpaid people in America, and I think everyone knows that, and we're going to do everything we can to help that cause. But, you know, we got to be a little, in these times, you got to be a little creative. Thanks.
Any other comments from our board? I think that this board, one of the reasons that she did present it and she articulated that was to make sure that this is on the forefront of our mind. We will work with our commissioners, our new commissioners, and we'll create a strategy that we can move forward with. But this is the beginning. We need all of you to be familiar with this information so that you'll understand how the salary study is done, and hopefully we can get some better pricing that we could move forward with something even more current than this, because the numbers she's using here are based on 3-year-old information, actually 4-year-old when you look at 2011. All right, board members, let's move on to the next item. We have the budget amendments. Ms. Klutz? Oh, you got to go back. Get your things.
All right. I have several budget amendments for you today, and we'll start with our state budget amendment. as we're going down, I'll point out the big numbers, and you tell me if you want to go back to any of the smaller ones. So the one that may grab your attention is a reduction to our EC allotment. What happens there is they give us a projection of the number of EC students that are going to be in our system, and they don't discount all the students that may go somewhere else. They just give it all to us. And then, when they get real numbers, they take the allotment away from us. This is an expected reduction. We're used to it. It just kind of looks big.
So is it staff that hasn't been hired? Is that kind of?
Exactly. Yeah. We knew that this money was going to go away, so we planned for it.
Okay. So no one is losing a position?
Absolutely not. No, that's correct. The other adjustment.
Could I,
Yes.
Lydia, so how many, I'm sorry I didn't give you advance warning, but does anybody know how many, system-wide, how many EC students do we have? I'm trying to understand if 31 represents a big percent or not.
I could get that number for you. I don't know if there's
Okay.
anybody here that
All right.
has that number, but
I just want to make sure that we're not, this isn't reflective of some kind of a big fleeing
Yeah.
of students. How many?
yeah, we're capped out of.
Okay, so that's of
30,000.
30,000, 12.5%.
Yeah.
It's 3,600, so that's less than 1%. So, okay, nothing to worry about, really. Okay, thanks.
And the other adjustment, the one that's long, that starts with the classroom teachers, the $86,000, that's the opposite. What happens is the state projected that we were going to have students leave and go to charter schools. They over-projected. Those students came back into our system, and so they gave us the money back. And so there were 57 of those students that came back into our system. So that's just the flip side of how they project one way and they don't project the other way. So that that's an absolutely positive thing. But we were expecting that too. We knew that the children were here and not going to the charter schools.
So you had projected close to 1,900 going to charter schools on your original budget projection, and now I see that we're down at 1,346.
Yeah, that
Is
was-
that truly a 400 and something reduction?
So that 1,900 was way back in January, February, and so we knew, more kind of in May and June that number was probably 400, 500 high, because we just knew that the charter schools were wrong. They were expecting enrollment, they were wanting enrollment, but the children weren't showing up. They were showing up here. So we were looking, when we were in mediation and we were talking about these numbers, we were more in line with 1,400, 1,500. And so that's probably a closer number. And so right now we were at 1,346. Now, all of my charter schools in December have not reported to me. There's not a requirement that they have to. They report to me when they want their money. Most of them have reported, but there's one or two out there that have not. So 1,346 is pretty close. Okay. All right. So that's state. Okay. Local is the next page, and okay. And so the first budget amendment you'll see as a result of the mediation, the results of the mediation, we received approximately $400,000 as a result of mediation, and you'll see that most of that went into teacher salaries. A lot of that went into health insurance. If you'll recall, we talked a lot about the Affordable Care Act and how that was impacting us, and we were having to pay for health insurance for substitutes where we had not before, and so that's where a lot of those dollars were placed.
And that was for 39 substitutes.
Right.
Okay.
Right. They did limit the number that they funded, yes.
Are those figures what we requested and agreed upon
Those
in remediation, or is there any amount still due from mediation in these categories?
Those are the agreed upon numbers. Yes. The next one is a reclass of funds to finish up the electronic file conversion for human resources. And the next one is, as we discussed last month and you approved the supplement schedule for the school building administration, there needed to be a budget amendment to take care of that. So that's what that is. Okay. And we'll go to federal dollars. And so the first one is just a reclass. The second one is the Governor's Teachers Network Grant. Teachers were selected to do some work and they're paid a stipend. We actually just pay that through here, through our payroll. Additional dollars through our preschool EC grant, and then a reclass of Title I funds. Okay. Capital outlay. Again, through our mediation efforts, we were allocated $2 million in addition to what was already allocated for the new Odell Elementary School grades 3 through 5. And there you see that amendment. And then in addition, we received funds for 3 roofing projects, and you'll see those listed there. And the next is our local special fund, and you see that's primarily our grants, and you'll see the School Climate Grant Award that we are recording there. And then in addition, we have the NFL Hometown Huddle Grant that was awarded to Rocky River.
Can you expand on what the school climate grant is?
Same question.
I can, but I think Jason will do a much better job than I will.
You remember probably 2 months ago, we received word that we won a school climate grant from the U.S. Department of Education for $3.7 million. Implementation, I believe, 4 years. And so this will go to the implementation of multi-tiered systems of support for our students, which is new structures within our schools to meet the needs of all of our students and build in supports for students both behaviorally and academically. So we're using most of that money to hire MTSS coaches in some of our schools.
MTS stands for?
Multi-tiered system of support.
And respectfully, in ordinary speak, what does that mean? I truly mean that
Right,
respectfully, for the general public, what does this support entail?
So looking at what we call the core academic program of the school, which is supposed to meet approximately 80% of the needs of the students, both academically and behaviorally. When that doesn't occur, then you work on changing some of the core academic and behavioral components of the school. If the core is working for most of your kids, then you work on what we call Tier 2, so hence the word tier, supports for students. Consider those interventions for small groups of kids. And then the last tier would be, so multi-tier, the last tier, the third tier is individual support. So not a small group intervention, but an intervention just for you. And that's where we bring in typically social worker, psychologist, a counselor, etc. to meet the needs of individual children.
And are these funds system-wide, or are they focused on particular schools?
They are focused on particular schools. In all, it'll affect 16 schools overall, eight schools in we're calling cohort 1. So 8 schools will be year 1 and 2, and then 8 different schools in year 3 and 4. Free and reduced lunch was a piece of the grant, so it's targeting our highest free and reduced lunch schools.
At some point, can we have a report as to the effectiveness of this
Absolutely.
grant, please?
Yeah.
At the appropriate time?
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
And how many positions, Jason?
8 positions every single year.
Have those positions already been filled?
Most of them have been, yeah.
Are those district level positions, or are they school level positions? Or are they evaluated by the principal at schools, or by?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they similar to BMTs?
No, our BMTs are classified positions. These are certified positions, so typically these are either a former teacher, I'm trying to think. I think they're all former teachers, so they're coming out of the classroom, hired at the school level.
Define the BMT again.
BMT is a behavior management technician. We have, I want to guess, maybe 8 to 10 BMTs in the district. They're hired through our special education department. That's a BMT.
All right, board members, do you have any other questions? This is one of the items that we had for consideration. If you don't have any questions or any more comments, let me just see a nod of the head for consideration for.
I'm okay for consent. Is there a way that we could get a report similar like we did with the QSCB to watch some of these capital funds spent down? Thanks.
All right, so consent? Okay. That's it.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if this is a point of privilege or if I'm just butting in the middle of the agenda, but can we take a moment, please, to recognize the representatives of the Boy Scouts of America who are in our audience tonight? I'm always impressed when adult and parent leaders bring any youth group to an event like this, but I hope you're having a good time and learning all about what we do here. What troop are you with? I'm sorry, Mr. We have to address the chair here, I believe.
Go ahead, Mr. Harrison.
I was just wondering what troop you might be in, please.
Troop 38, Lieutenant.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, board members, we will now go to number 2 on the agenda, and that's the language immersion, and Dr. Van Hukelum is coming forward to talk to us about this.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm going to try to do a couple things tonight with language immersion. First of all, I want to frame the conversation tonight with what we're asking you to do as a board. What we're asking you to do as a board is to consider the 3-year kind of vision for language immersion in Cabarrus County schools and vote to give us approval to move forward with this idea through the budget process as it begins in early January. So the actual amount of money that is needed to launch an immersion program doesn't have to come to the board for approval. It's not above $250,000, but obviously the concept of language immersion affects the different makeups of our schools and also is something that you would want to be aware of. So before we go ahead and move forward with that in the budget process, we want to make sure we have a thumbs up from the school board. I want to start with some data that we have collected from Furr Elementary School. As you know, we're in year 2 of implementation with the Spanish language immersion at Furr Elementary School, and you've been able to review these documents, but I do think it really highlights the success of the program that we've experienced at Furr Elementary School. And so let's first talk about dual language immersion, which is the program that we have at Furr. It has 50% of the students who are ESL Spanish-speaking students and 50% of the students who are English-speaking students. And so that's what we use to define a dual language program. And what's been great about this program is it's really accomplished 2 objectives. One is we're seeing that it's closing the educational achievement gap for our Hispanic students. Currently, we have a pretty large achievement gap between our Hispanic students and our white students in regular testing, ranging from 15 points to 30 points, depending on what category you want to pick. And so what we're seeing is that dual language immersion is really serving to close that educational achievement gap for our Hispanic youth. Secondly, what we're finding that also supports the national and international research on immersion is that, as I was quoted in the paper last time, immersion just makes smarter kids, okay? So not only is it closing the educational gap for Hispanic students, the process of language acquisition, in particular at a young age, does something cognitively in the brain and makes smarter children. And so that sense there, language, I pulled this from a book, it says language acquisition is first and foremost a problem-solving activity. So the mental processes that we use to learn another language is the same mental processes we would use to solve complex problems. And so at that very young age, as the brain is developing, it's simply making smarter children. One of the primary motivators, I think, for districts across the country, and reason why we're seeing a spike in dual language immersion programs, is that we understand that in the coming years, our national makeup is changing. And so here I pulled some national data to show the trends of the demographic trends of our country. And you can see within the next 20 years, our Hispanic population will double nationally, and our white population is diminishing. Okay, and that'll make up a very strong voter bloc for our country. And in order to sustain the democracy that we have, this republic that we cherish, we need an educated citizenry that is able to participate in that democracy. And so by the numbers, you're going to see that the Hispanic population is increasing over time. Not only nationally, but that is true here at home. So here you have just 3 years of data. It's not 20 years of data, but it's 3 years of data that also supports that trend. That here in Cabarrus County, the white population is decreasing and the Hispanic population is increasing. We have every reason to believe that that will continue. So I want you to think of the current 4-year-olds out there, our current 4-year-olds in Cabarrus County who speak Spanish, and that's all they speak. In 20 years, they will be a part of this large population of Hispanic young adults in our country. And we have a couple of choices. What we know about language acquisition is it takes 6 to 8 years for any of us to learn a language. That's just the process. You can't accelerate language acquisition necessarily over time. You can put it in an incubator and maybe get a year or 2 more years out of that, but basically language acquisition just takes time. So our current 4-year-olds who are speaking only Spanish in the home, we know that just by coming to school and participating in our regular academic program, they're going to learn English probably at a good level by the time they're 10, 11, or 12, okay, by the time they come to school. The question we have to ask as a school system is, will they learn anything else, right? They're going to learn English. It just takes time to learn English. The question is, will they learn anything else, and will they be connected to school? Will they have a strong affinity for school, and will they enjoy coming to school, feel a part of the school community, and feel like they have success at school and not become a dropout? And so what we have here is just some math and reading data to support that. The immersion program at Furr Elementary School is showing some strong academic results. Granted, this is just year 1 data from our kindergarten, our current first graders, so this is last year's kindergarten data. But the math analysis in particular is really supports that argument that dual language immersion allows these Hispanic youth to learn other things, not just language. So they're doing well in math. And you can see the math data that we have there captures some different components of math. And when you look at those graphs, what we've done is we've broken out the trajectory of learning from the splash students and the non-splash students. Okay, this is over the course of a year. The blue line represents our splash students, and the green line represents the non-splash students at Furr Elementary School. You'll notice, as we might expect, that the initial data point for the splash students is below the regular population. Okay. However, over the course of time, in every single category for math, the trajectory of learning is steeper, and they ultimately learn have data above the regular population at Furr Elementary School. So you can see that that's true for all of these categories with math. Unfortunately, we don't have a math proficiency test in kindergarten, so we have to use some drill down data, whereas we do have reading proficiency data thanks to Reading 3D. So here's your math data there. You can see that. Notice oral counting in particular has a nice steep trajectory. These are the trajectories we like to see in our business. So
You're talking about Hispanic and
correct.
So both groups of kids.
Correct. Yeah. For reading, we use Reading 3D data, which just gives us a proficiency. Are you reading as we would expect an average kindergartner to read at the end of the year? And so here we kind of tried to disaggregate this a couple different ways. But I do want to, before we get into reading, one of the concerns we had going into this endeavor was, wait a minute, this is counterintuitive. You're going to teach kids half the amount of time in English as you would normally, and we're going to still expect them to read. while we knew that was true nationally from the research that we based the program on, we were all kind of like, wait a minute, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'm happy to report that the data indicates that our students are learning to read, even though they're experiencing English only 50% of the time. So here you have just ESL kindergarten students, splash versus non-splash, in this first graph. You'll notice our splash kids outperform the non-splash students. Again, this is just Hispanic ESL children in this particular graph. So 42% of them were proficient in reading in the splash program, and 25% were proficient in reading outside of the splash program. Because we only opened 2 tracks that first year, not every ESL Spanish-speaking student was able to participate in Splash. So that's why we have those non-Splash Hispanic ESL students. Whereas after you expanded the program and opened up 4 tracks, now every ESL student at that school in kindergarten is able to participate. So we don't have this comparison group anymore, but we did have it year 1. Here you have all of our Splash students together. So, out of a cohort, I think of 130, 140 students at Furr Elementary School, 48 Splash, the rest are non-Splash. You can see that by ethnicity, our Splash students outperformed our non-Splash students pretty significantly. And you can look at that, our Hispanic, white, and African American students. What's interesting is our African American students in immersion, and this is also supported by national research, really have an affinity for immersion education and do very well. 100% proficiency of our African American students in Splash.
What number of students is that?
It's not a lot. No, you're looking at maybe 10 out of 48. So half of them are Hispanic, so that's 24. Then you have, in the other half, you have white. Yeah, 100% of the African American students in Splash were proficient, but it's a very small N, that's for sure. Probably less than 10. Here you have some comparable schools. Okay, so this is just taking all the kindergarten kids. These schools all have within 2%, 50% free and reduced lunch. Okay, so you can sort of see that Furr Elementary School outperformed Coultron Webb and R. Brown McAllister in kindergarten proficiency. Then we took a school that has a similar ESL population, which is about 25% ESL, and compared that to Wolf Meadow. Very different free and reduced lunch demographics for sure, but the same ESL population. And so you can see these are ESL students at Furr versus the ESL students at Wolf Meadow. Okay, lots of different ways to slice and dice that data. So those are some data coming out of that really, to me, highlight why we want to expand immersion opportunities for our students. What we would like to do is twofold. In my mind, the number one priority would be to expand the opportunity for dual language immersion, Spanish language immersion, to more students in Cabarrus County. Over the next 3 years, and next year being year 1, we would like to open another dual language immersion school in another Title I school that has space as well, that we could do the open enrollment process that we also do at Furr. You can see in Priority 1, ultimately it'd be great to have 3 options for our community in 3 of our highest ESL areas, but then also open up those doors for our English-speaking families to choose, just like they do at Furr, to drive, no transportation, drive to that school as an open enrollment school. That's been another win that we've experienced with Furr Elementary School. We've had a school that was built for 1,000 students, pretty landlocked, not a lot of development. How do we get that school up in enrollment? 20% of the kindergartners involved in the Splash program are driving outside of the attendance zone, leaving other schools to participate in the immersion program at Furr Elementary School. So over time, 20% a year, that's going to fill up Furr Elementary School pretty close to our projections that we gave you at the last year. We would do the same exact model at another school in different geographic areas of the county. Obviously, if I'm a family in Mount Pleasant or a family that's even in North Concord, driving to Furr might be prohibitive. But if I have a school that's closer to me, I might choose to do that. Okay, so that was priority 1, is to open another dual language immersion school next year, and then another one maybe the year after that. But at the end of the day, within 3 years, the idea is to have 3 full dual language immersion schools. You can see the the cost there, basically the dual language programs pay for themselves over time. The budget expansion is really paying for that annual fee. Other items in there come out of other budgets that we already have budgeted, like textbooks and things like that. But over time, because of the use of VIF teachers, we receive conversion dollars from the state of North Carolina, and as the more VIF teachers we have in a school, the more they pay for itself. Yes.
So the funds for language immersion are totally or in whole state dollars, or are they county dollars? What is the source of the funding for language immersion?
Right now, it's a mix of, we have some federal money going to that, some of our Title III money goes to that, and then how we pay the teachers, that's where Kelly does she
Magic.
decides, low-paid teachers, we're going to pay local dollars. High-paid teachers, we're going to pay state dollars. Primarily state, she's
So
saying.
language immersion is as much of a hybrid as
Absolutely.
everything else that we
Yeah,
often
yeah,
do here.
yeah.
So
The
these funds come from many sources.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Textbook funds come from textbook funds, etc. What I'm trying to show in this table here is that as you increase the number of teachers from VIF, typically our VIF teachers are lower in experience, so they don't cost as much, but we receive a pretty healthy amount from the state for those allocations, and we can convert those dollars to cash, and in a sense, we kind of say over 6 years, potentially that program pays for itself based on the teachers that we get. It's not one-to-one, but it's something to consider. The second proposal or priority would be to explore the idea of offering Mandarin immersion. And this is, a little different take. This would not be for any purpose of closing achievement gaps with students that speak Mandarin. Obviously, we don't have a lot of students that speak Mandarin. This would be that second outcome that we're experiencing from immersion, which is it just creates smarter kids, right? This language immersion is just a good thing for students to experience if they want to. We currently have some data to suggest that some of the schools, particularly in the Cox Mill region, have families and community that really would like to see that as an option at their school. And so this particular option would only be at the support or the kind of groundswell of the community that would say, we really want something different for our children. And we would implement that at that school. This would not be a magnet school or an open enrollment school. Obviously, Cox Mill is pretty slammed to the gills already. But when we did survey our parents, Cox Mill was overwhelmingly the number one school that was vocal about that. I even at their request went out and met with some of those families as they kind of explained their desire to have a Mandarin immersion program. And you can see some of the survey data there. So the process for Mandarin would be a little different in the sense of it would really require strong data to suggest that it's sustainable, that the community is fully supportive of it, and that we can continue that program over many, many years, not just a one-hit wonder. So we would do a lot of community building before we would decide to launch that. Trying to think if there's anything else before we take any questions, but I think that captures everything. So what we're asking you to do is kind of is to vote on this idea, this vision that over 3 years we would expand immersion opportunities. If you say yes to that vision, to that idea, then we will take these ideas through the budget process and prioritize those, and either within current funds or through expansion dollars, we would then be able to start some of these programs. I'll take any questions at this time.
All right, board members, you've heard Dr. Van Huckelen present. Mr. Powell, would you like to start us off with some questions? Or do you have any?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jason, for the presentation. And I don't know that I necessarily have any questions. I've reached out to Jason and got answers to a couple of questions that I had. I have mainly concerns. Basically, like Jason said, there was only 1 year of data, and that was kindergarten data. And instead of using objective data, we chose to use the running record, which at most it can be objective, but not really. It's the most subjective piece of data that we have. I mean, there's other measures that are more objective, which I think they participated in. We just maybe we could see that as well instead of just the running record for proficiency. But the one thing that is kind of concerning is that some of the achievement data is created from these students that have the parent involvement, which I personally think that's the most important indicator of a child's success. And so it's fantastic that the parents are involved and they're, being able to be successful in this environment. That's fantastic. In the presentation, there's 3 years of data and in a couple of the graphs, but really we only have one for what we're doing. And I would like to see maybe a continuation of the program that we're doing now. I understand there's not a wait list. Maybe if there was a wait list, then we could, maybe do something along those lines. But, and also I was a little concerned that there's not requirements for that second language. I know that they take a running record in, which is the subjective measure of the ones that they choose. They take a running record in Spanish, but when the 3-year plan, I don't see a requirement for maybe some level of fluency in Spanish for the non-native speakers. I know we want the Spanish speakers to be fluent in English, but anyway, just some of those concerns. And like I said before, I got a lot of information at once, and I didn't have a chance to. I've only sent Jason 3 questions, and he did his best to respond over Thanksgiving, and I really appreciate that. But I'll get my thoughts together before. I guess we have to vote here in a little bit, don't we?
Well, I was
we
going to
don't?
ask you,
Okay.
would you like to see this on the action agenda for next meeting?
I don't know if somebody tell me.
Yeah, the action
that
agenda,
means.
if it was on consent, then we would go into the next business meeting with the agenda item basically being approved. However, if it's on the action agenda, then we will have another discussion about this same topic. Dr. Van Huken will come back up and clarify any questions that the board may have during the week.
Okay.
And then we will vote as to whether we want to pursue
I think I do
this.
want action agenda.
Okay.
So we will have another discussion and an actual vote.
Yes.
Good.
Yes. But I'll still open the floor to comments, and Ms. Carpenter?
Well, first of all, what happened to the kindergarten, what happened to the first graders? I mean, we've had the program, why was there not data gathered on the first graders that was in this program?
This is the first graders' data last year for a full year. So our first graders, my daughter, right, she's only been in first grade since
Why does it say it's kindergartners?
Because it's last year's kindergarten data. Those kindergartners are now first graders.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So this is,
This is the first cohort of data.
okay, so
Yep.
we don't, and that's one of the problems. I really would like to see us get more data instead of just having this. And that's one problem. And my thing is, why are we seeing this now? And it's like it's being thrown at us and saying, we want it now. I would rather see it going through regular budget process, go through Trigo, go through the whole thing like we regularly see all our other things go through. And it's like it's being thrown at us saying, okay, we got to do it now, we got to do it now. And I don't like to see that. I'm just going to be right up front with you.
So the reason we're doing it now is so that we can get your approval or your will before the budget process. If the board doesn't want to expand immersion, then we wouldn't take it through the budget
I
process.
personally would like to see more data on it. Like you say, you're only giving me one thing of data, and this was one of the things we asked for.
Right.
Because we had the program for 6 months, and then all of a sudden, we said we have 25 people, we want to expand it. And all of a sudden, we get an expansion on it. We had no data whatsoever, which I did not like. I did not approve it. I wanted data. Now we've just got one piece of data. Now you're saying we want it in 3 other schools. I would much rather have more data on it before I would want to see us do it. We've got a little bit of data in front of us. Does kindergartners, when do they start taking EOGs? Actually, the reading.
3rd grade.
3rd grade. And again, we've got just a tad of data. I like to see a little bit more than what we've got. 2, now, it says $50,000. Is that per school? So that would be multiplied times 3. So you're looking at $150,000. You know, we just got through talking about how much we need to be paying teachers. To me, we need to make sure we get our teachers paid. We need to get a lot of other things we've got to prioritize. So I definitely want it on action. So I could go on and on, but I'm going to stop.
Dr. Phillips?
Okay. Well, I'm pleased to see the results. When we started this program, what really motivated me was the clear evidence that what we're currently doing with our Spanish-speaking students is not working when it comes to reading. They just, when you have English-speaking students in a school at 80% proficiency in reading in third grade and the Spanish-speaking students at 20%, clearly it's not working. And so this is showing promise. Yes, it's only 1 year's worth of data. I don't see how it could be any worse than what we're doing now. So I'm all in favor of expansion. I'm concerned about those students at Wolf Meadow, and that if we wait until their cohorts get to third grade, then we've lost them. And there's going to be a whole bunch of those kids who are going to be going to the Read to Achieve camps, and we're all going to be going, gosh, why do we have such lousy numbers? And it's because we've failed to act when there was clear evidence that what we're currently doing in our traditional classrooms is not working. We have an obligation to find something better, and it looks like maybe we have something. I kind of look like it as Carolina Panthers offensive line. If we put different personnel in there, I don't think it can get much worse, so I don't see the problem of trying something new. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Mr. Walter?
Well, I think I'm also encouraged by some of the numbers that show an increase. And I think innovation is important in what we're doing and setting the bar. And how many other North Carolina systems have a SPLASH program?
I had that number. I can get that for you. I don't have it off the top of my head.
No, I personally last year was invited to go see the classroom, and we went in there and we saw some pretty good things that were going on inside the classroom. I was pretty impressed with how the English, Spanish kids were helping the English kids learn the Spanish and the other way around when it came into the other side. So I think it is a good program. I didn't quite understand how we're funding it, but as a parent, I think if that's options, I think more options that we have for parents are good. And if it's making a difference with the ESL students, I'm in favor of that as well. But I kind of would like to see more on how the funding works at a later time. Thanks.
Mr. Harrison?
And I apologize ahead of time if I'm all over the board, but I'm going to try to be very brief about this. This similar proposal came before us, I believe, last year or a year and a half ago, and I think the board very wisely at that time, with a different composition of board members, chose to direct staff to expand the SPLASH program for Spanish only. And again, we have new members, and therefore we have a different current need to see what the preferences of the board might be currently. And I thought it was wise at that time to use those resources and to put all those resources into Spanish immersion. And I'm a former English teacher, again, beat that horse, I suppose, but my point is that I get, and I truly think I do get, the cognitive development that occurs from language acquisition. I am, hopefully I'm being supportive of that. Yet to my point of view, as I added up here, it looks like $268,500 in this total proposal going to Mandarin instruction. And I just don't quite yet get it why we can't spend $500,000 towards Spanish instruction as opposed to divvying it out half and half, give or take, between Spanish and Mandarin. The justification here in your notes is that some folks would appreciate Mandarin as a choice in their schools. I'm real sorry, maybe to put it this way, but the limited resources we have for instruction at all can't be predicated upon folks appreciating a choice. So there might have been other reasons, and I appreciate the survey that you and your staff went to. But it seems to me that if we want to effectively use the SPLASH program and its resources from the many places where those funds come from, that we could make a big dent in the need of students who currently only speak Spanish acquiring greater English skills and therefore improving their scores in theory, but probably in fact as well. But if these resources could be concentrated in Spanish instruction, does it stand to good reason that we would do a whole lot more than carving half of that off to groups who would appreciate Mandarin instruction? That's a rhetorical question. I don't mean to put you on the spot about that. My common sense, just where I'm from, leads me to believe that children, if you picked 100 students taking Spanish, they would in all likelihood take it from pre or kindergarten through 12th grade, and not only come out strong in Spanish, but would use Spanish. And I ain't spending, pardon me, I'm not spending national dollars, and I just about don't care nationally what we're doing here. We're spending Cabarrus County resources, and so I am trying to focus on what Cabarrus County's needs are. If you took another 100 students and started them on a track of Mandarin Chinese, I kind of suspect that they would take it for a few years, but that they wouldn't go through the whole 12 and 13 years of their schooling in Cabarrus County in the early 21st century until the year 2030 or that kind of thing. I suspect that the 100 students who took Spanish would be 80 students who were very strong in Spanish when they got toward the end of their school career, and that the 100 students who took Mandarin would be dwindled down to a very small, limited number. And so I don't quite have my brain around the effective use of the funding for Mandarin when that funding could do much more social good for the Spanish population that needs the language acquisition. And again, I do feel like I'm all over the board here, but I hope we will have a vote on this, and I would like to suggest that the Spanish portion be one vote and the Mandarin portion be a separate vote, because I will vote against the Mandarin portion out of a conviction that the funding laid out in this plan for Mandarin would be much more effective, focused on Spanish immersion. I hope my proposal makes some sense there for you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Furr.
Well, I guess it's good to go last. Everyone had great points, and my opinions kind of agree with each one had a little bit of what I was thinking, but you guys must be trying to punish me, because when I was on this board before, we talked about salary study, I voted against. We talked about this immersion, I voted against before. So you're trying to run me off early, or I don't quite know really what's going on. Nah, when you get the data you got, how many students, the students that were chosen to do the program, how do those kids get chose to do, and you had some that didn't? So to me, they probably were pretty good students.
So, and this kind of answers one of Vince's questions as well. So in the dual language immersion, all the Hispanic students that are in the program are not chosen. They are.
But I thought where you got your data from, because you said some.
Well, in this first year, right.
Right.
I mean, we had, most of the Hispanic students were able to participate, not all of them, because we only opened up 2 tracks. This current year, every single ESL Hispanic student is in the program. They don't have a choice. It is their ESL service, right? So that's half of the students. The other half of the students are choice students. So the English-speaking students, like Maggie, their parents chose, and so they do have high parent involvement. You're absolutely right. But so when you look at the data, think of it this way. Half of the data comes from some really, really at-risk students. I'm talking some of our most at-risk kids in the district. The other half of the data comes from probably our highest, some of our highest data that we would get anyways. Our families that are, reading to their kids from the time they're born and come from families of choice. So, yeah.
But that's still, I hear you, but how was the Spanish kids, how were they chosen? Because some didn't get to do it. So there had to be a criteria.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'd have to ask Darren on that. When you look at this one right here, for example, this is the one graph that really shows the ESL Hispanic students who were in Splash versus the ESL Hispanic students who are not in Splash. So 24 ESL Hispanic kids were in Splash, and the rest were not in Splash. And I don't know that number, and I don't know how they were chosen. I'm trying to...
And I guess it's
I don't know
no
if they
big
did
deal,
a
but I'm just
lottery
thinking
instead.
that maybe they were the brightest of the ESL students. And could could be, the data could be a little skewed
Yeah.
a little bit, that maybe not.
We can
And it's
get
not
that for you
big,
by
I
next
don't want
week.
to,
Yeah.
to beat this thing, but,
I can tell you that wasn't the intent.
Yeah.
Most likely it was lotteried. I'd have to talk to Darren,
Okay.
so it was random.
Yeah.
But again, when you're talking about an ESL Hispanic student, again, those, as in general, those are some at-risk students that are going to struggle in
I
school.
understand.
Yeah.
And that's one thing we're charged with in public education. You got to educate every student that comes through that door the best that you can. And so I totally, get what we're trying to achieve, but, with dollars tagged with it, and you don't like to talk about money when you're trying to educate a kid. I mean, I don't, but I guess we have to. Now, at Cox Mill, you met with parents. How many, exactly, are you talking about 10 kids?
Well, and that's...
I
Yeah.
mean, do we know?
So, to really have to Mr. Harrison, to your point, you don't want to invest. This is the risk with Mandarin.
Right.
If you go in on Mandarin, you want to be sure that you're going to have a program 6 years later, and so you're going to need at least 25 students that are committed to that program in kindergarten, maybe more, because you will have attrition. One of the downsides to these programs is you can't enter the program third grade, for example. So you start with a group of students and simply kids moving, I don't like it, I don't want to do it anymore, that's going to happen. So in order to really launch a Mandarin program, you've got to have some really strong community data, and that's data that we've started, but we would have to get before we would make that decision. And you got to know that it's going to be there forever.
Yeah, this is bringing a lot of memories back. But one thing, when you were talking about it takes 8 years, but that commercial says Rosetta Stone can teach you to speak Spanish, and I'm just kidding.
I've tried Rosetta Stone.
I have, Mr. Chairman, just one more. Has there been any discussion about a 90-10 class at FUR versus the 50-50? I understand that half of the class is spoken in English and half in Spanish, but there are other models, a 90% Spanish, full Spanish immersion, which for years now, when I've heard Spanish immersion, I thought it was 90-10 because that's been my experience. But now I find out it's 50-50, kind of an enrichment, but more than enrichment. Has any talk been about a 90-10 class?
So the reason you do dual language is to kill two birds with one stone, right? To close the achievement gap for your Hispanic students and enrich the English-speaking students. So 90-10 would be the approach of any Mandarin program. I would use 90-10 if I was trying to do Spanish immersion in a school that had mostly English-speaking students. That's probably the more appropriate use of a 90-10. So, for example, if we were trying to do Spanish immersion at Cox Mill, you would use a 90-10 approach. The dual language approach is kind of that, it really does a lot of things for you. To me, it does three things. Number one, it closes the achievement gap for Hispanic youth. Number two, it creates smarter kids. And oh, by the way, they end up becoming biliterate. That's kind of like a byproduct to me, especially now as a parent, but also as we've been doing this for 2 years. It started as oh, cool, kids are going to speak 2 languages. They get to read, write, and speak in Spanish and English. That's pretty cool. Now I'm seeing the other benefits to that, to where the language acquisition is now kind of, and they get to speak Spanish as a byproduct to these other great things that are happening.
Okay, thank you. Has there been any after-school or enrichment activities involving Mandarin Chinese at Cox Mill to maybe gauge some parent support, maybe not just interest on a survey, but, they're going to spend some time, effort, and money to, participate?
So the primary reason I think the Cox Mill community in particular is interested in Mandarin Chinese is because for the last, I believe we're in our 3rd year, we've had a Chinese guest teacher with the College Board at Cox Mill Elementary School serving as a specials teacher, an encore teacher. So once every maybe 7 days, the students in that school get to go to Chinese class. And, once every 7 days, you're going to learn how to say hello and order a hamburger in Chinese. So they've had a taste of Mandarin Chinese. In addition, it is offered at Harris Road Middle School as a class, and it's offered at Cox Mill High School as a class. So that corridor, that feeder system, that community has an affinity towards Mandarin that maybe other feeder systems don't have at this point.
Yes, sir, thank you. I think it's at Hickory Ridge Middle as well. My son enjoys it, yep.
Okay, Dr. Shepard wants like to say a few words.
I have some comments I want to make, but I want to follow up with a question. Why are we offering, and I know the answer, okay, why are we offering this at Cox Mill Elementary and Harris Road and Cox Mill, but not at Mount Pleasant Elementary and Mount Pleasant Middle and Mount Pleasant High School? Talk to us about that in a minute.
Well, there's, again, it kind of, the priority, if you read through there, it's about the community level support.
Why are we offering it currently at Cox Mill but not at Mount Pleasant?
Oh, the Chinese guest teacher programs? Well, I mean, the historical answer is started at Cox Mill High School by a high school that said, hey, we want this, and reached out and got it going, got the, they took the initiative and got the grant written, and we got selected. So Cox Mill High School was the leader in that. Then we enjoyed that program so much we expanded it and got 2 teachers, and then it started to trickle down to Harris Road, and then the year after we got 3 teachers, and we kept it in that corridor so that that community could experience Mandarin Chinese. And also, I mean, in that particular community, you have families who it's considered a bedroom community of Charlotte for a reason, right? Like these families are going to be, in some ways, understand the value of speaking Mandarin that maybe other communities might not, and see their children participating in that type of economic or job type thing for the long run. So those are some reasons.
Okay, and I would add, and correct me if I'm wrong, that those principals absorb that within their current allotment. So Allison at Cox Mill Elementary School is giving up something in order to get the teacher to teach the Mandarin to the kids, and that's creating the interest. Tripp at Harris Road is giving up something to get that. Todd at Cox Mill High School was also within his current allotment. So it's the desire and will of the community and the teachers and the students that's creating that. So I answered my own question. All right. So one of the things that I heard during the election from some of the candidates was that why is it that the board just rubber stamps what the administration brings forward? Did y'all hear that? Mm-hmm. Well, I want you to know this is a grand opportunity or an example of how that's not the case. I mean, right now, I don't know where you're going to go with this. And I want you to know that we don't take this personally if you don't agree with us. But it's our job to bring information to you that we think is in the best interest of our students. We have, as Dr. Phillips pointed out eloquently, we have an ESL program that's not working as well as we want it to work. And we brought you the data that we have locally, along with the data that we see nationally that says this works. So we have something that we know is not working as well as we want it to, and here's something that does work. So it's our job to bring that to you. Now, there are all kinds of cultural issues in the community that come up when we start talking, and you'll see that next week probably. We'll probably have 4 or 5 people that want to get on the agenda to speak to you, and they'll tell you why this is a bad idea for reasons that might not be related to student achievement. Okay, so we'll see how that goes this week. But we know it's working, and we have a small example of data that shows that it's not only working nationally, but it's working right here. And I think you're right that it is very subjective data, but right now, and I do want us to bring forward the data that Vince is mentioning next week, and if we can pull that together to look at that too. But it's the best we have, and it aligns with what we see occurring nationally. Now, the Mandarin piece. I've been with you for 7 years, and in that 7 years, we have seen the cap on charter schools lifted. And we have seen an attempt in Cabarrus County, like very few, if any other counties in our state, at bringing in charter schools that want to take our children. And, we don't consider them the enemy, but it's just like Carolina Panthers and another team. Panthers are my team, and I want to do everything I can to help them win. The public school system is my team, and I want to do everything I can to help you win, okay? Help you win in educating our children. If I knew what you've told me tonight, that there is a significant group of people in our community that want their children taught in a dual education, or not dual, would be the 90-10 language immersion program, and I'm listening with the ear of a charter school principal. If we don't do it, then if I were that principal, I'd do it. There's a school sitting right in the middle of that community right now. What's the name of it?
International.
Carolina International. If you don't do it, buddy, and I'm that principal, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to take those kids of those very interested parents, I'm going to go after them as hard as I can, and I'm going to win a few of those. Yeah. So I bring this to you for a number of reasons. One, we are working diligently to make the public school system, the traditional public school system in this community work, and here's an example of how it is with choice. And we have a group of students that are behind that we want to help. And we have a board that's new, some members new tonight, and an administration who's bringing you an idea that may next week not fly, but you'll never be able to say that we pulled this from the agenda because we didn't have the support. If it doesn't fly, it doesn't fly, and we'll keep looking for the next solution. But we believe it's the right thing to do, and it's the best thing to do. So enjoy the week and all the discussion that will occur as a result of this, and we'll move forward next week.
Thank you, Dr. Shepard. Ms. Carpenter, you had some more comments?
Well, yes, one of the things, a comment was made, well, something's not working. Well, one of the things, though, too, that we used to do that did work, and then it was taken away, and that was the teacher assistants, and y'all have heard me beat this band many a times. Teacher assistants helped our children learn how to read by helping the teachers, taking them into small groups, and that did work. And then they were taken away from us. If we put them back in the classrooms, they could help our children learn how to read, and that did work. And it worked for many years. So I have to say that's something that did work. And maybe if we put that money back into the classroom, put those back into the classroom, maybe that would help. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Okay, board members,
I'm not responding to Carol. I didn't talk about Mandarin when it was my turn to go through. And since I currently live in the Coxville Elementary enrollment zone, it's to be determined whether I will continue based on the proposal that we looked at earlier this year. I feel that I can talk about it. My son took Mandarin in high school. Of course, now he's taking German now that he's in college, but I think that's because he wants to work for BMW. But I understand why the parents in the Cox Mill area are interested. I think they know as well as I, and you do too, that China is the second largest economy in the world. All trends are pointing to it's going to be the first largest. I think long term, however, the United States will come back, but that's a whole other subject. So I think that there's an economic opportunity there. If you have a child that is fluent in Chinese, and there's a billion reasons why you would want that, because there's a billion people who are fluent. And so I would support the expansion of the program. I would not, however, limit it to only those who live in the Cox Mill Elementary Zone. I don't believe in building walls and pulling up ladders. And so I wouldn't vote for that. And I think instead, because Cox Mill is overcrowded, if we want to make it an open enrollment, we move it to the new Odell schools, where we should have more room. And so I would like to propose that.
All right, board members, I have a couple questions that I'd like to ask. First is a rhetorical question. Are they actually smarter, or are they really using more of what they were given? I don't think they're smarter. I think that they're using what God gave them well, and I think that they are really utilizing their brains to their best capability. So I wouldn't use smarter. I would use something else. Anecdotal evidence. Some of the anecdotal evidence that I think is missing from this discussion is Mr. Roberts himself and the parental involvement that's going on as a result of these ESL, these Spanish language speakers, our Hispanic children, and their role and their parents' role. Because from my discussions with Mr. Roberts, it seemed like they were actually taking some ownership in the school that they previously would have stayed on the sidelines and stayed under the radar. But now they're actually taking a more active approach. That's what we really want, is to get, and that interaction then has them interacting with the parents of the children of color and the white parents, and now you get a crossbreeding of some ideas and some thinking that probably wouldn't normally happen. It would be really nice if we could have Mr. Roberts come and talk to us a little bit about that, because I think that's extremely important, and I think it's a soft issue that this board isn't aware of. But we've got to find out, are we really integrating the parents into this process, and are they taking ownership for this program? Because that's what truly makes public school, or makes any school, really a living activity. I had on my list was the Odell redistricting, and by limiting it to Cox Mill, we've just set ourselves up for failure in what Dr. Phillips just talked about. So there's some things with the Mandarin that we really need to truly think about, and how are we going to pursue that. And then as they move up through the ranks into the higher grades, do they stay at Harris Road, or is that an open enrollment? The whole transfer process goes all the way up through the high school level, because obviously some of these children will go to Northwest and to Northwest Middle, and so we would have to set that up. But that was a big thing that we heard from in the redistricting discussions that we had earlier in the fall. Some of the parents were disappointed that they might not be able to have that opportunity to have access to the Mandarin teaching. So board members, I see that this is an action item, so we'll put this on our next week's agenda as an action item. We can set them up in any way, form. 2 separate votes would be fine to break it apart. So, all right, thank you, Jason. All right, board members, we've come to the more interesting part of our meeting. Dr. Louder, are you ready for the calendar? I think we can do that one pretty quickly, don't you think?
I hope so. To summarize, I sent an email to try to explain essentially the law change to give. Right now, what the law reads is if Christmas is on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, you get one more holiday, and they've changed that to say you get one more holiday to make that work at Christmas. So the only change, and this is not for this school year, this is for 15-16, is to move the December 23rd day, which is now an annual leave day, make that a holiday, and make November 25th, the day before Thanksgiving, an annual leave day. So I don't think there's any negative to that. It essentially gives everybody one more holiday and changes the way it's coded. So just flips to everybody's benefit.
All right, board members, Mr. Walter?
I was hoping Mr. Pittman would stay in the room for just a minute more longer. This is an issue. I mean, this one here is fine, but I mean, the issue here is that the state controls our calendar. Tells us when we can start, when we can finish, and we have a major issue in a year, is it?
Not 15, 16, but 16, 17, where it becomes a major issue, yes.
It becomes a major issue. We really need local control of the calendar. And I think, there's no evidence to support that it's helpful at all to have state controlling your calendar. It'd probably be even more helpful if we could end the second semester at the Christmas break. But we don't have that right. We don't have that option to do that. And I kind of wish he was kind of here, but we have some school districts who are doing resolutions asking for a more local control. I think one was done in Durham recently. And I'd like our board to consider a resolution that's similar to that asks for some local control of our calendar. And I don't know if you want to go into more detail what that issue is in 2 years, but it's significant.
Yeah, it can get a little complicated. Mr. Walter was our representative on the calendar committee, and ultimately, by defining when the day you can begin and when the day you end on, when that happens on a Friday and a Monday, and it gives you no flexibility, it almost makes it not possible to get those days in. And right now, we got together to do 3 years worth of calendar so people could plan ahead, and we could not get the days in for 16, 17 because it kind of falls in the worst case scenario of when Friday and Monday will land. So we couldn't get the days in and said, well, we're probably ahead of other people to go out all the way to 16, 17, but everybody's going to have this problem. And everything Mr. Walter said was very, articulated the problems with that is we need control of the local calendar and we can solve all these problems.
Could we get a copy of that county that did the resolution? I'd love to get one and us maybe do. I mean, I agree with you 100%, Rob. It's absurd. I mean, we face this all the time.
Right.
I'd love to get a copy and for us to do a resolution on our, but get a copy of theirs.
That's, if you remember at the annual conference for the National School Board, for the North Carolina School Board, this was one of the legislative agenda items, was the calendar. And so that is top and foremost on theirs. I believe that we as a board need to put together, rather than a whole bunch of different little resolutions, we need to establish our legislative agenda, and that should be something for a future meeting. But I believe we need to find out what the issues are that we're really interested in and put those together, and then we can send those off to our representatives and let them know exactly how we stand, rather than just hit them with resolution after resolution, because I think they get watered down over time, and this was one of the things that I was told. Mr. Furr?
Yeah, previously on the board, we met with our local legislators and asked them to do that. And they were real frank with us, and they already have agreements with other parts of the state. So, but you're right, we need to sit down face to face and tell them what we would like.
Mr. Harrison?
Over the years, several times I've tried to speak to our delegation, and as much as any district in the state, much less Cabarrus, would love for the state to give us money for a variety of reasons. If they would just let up on some of the regulation and just give us greater local control, that would be worth its weight in gold. So in a broader context than this particular item, a legislative agenda that focused on true legislative granting of more local control would alleviate a lot of the other resource issues that we sometimes have. But this is at least a step, and I'm sorry I don't get or take a chance more frequently to say thank you to the North Carolina legislature, but at least they're allowing this to be worked on and redress this issue. So at least it is a step in the right direction.
All right, board members, do you want this on the consent agenda? Nod at your head. All right. So this one will go on the consent agenda. Our next one is the policy revisions, which this is the really fun part, first reading. And I know everyone has read every bit of this, and there are going to be no comments.
And they've read it
So
twice.
I will start with Mr. Furr.
No comment.
Well, Dr. Lowry, you can go and take us through it.
Right.
And start at the first one, and we'll just ask for comments.
Okay,
if we need to.
we'll go through one at a time. Our first one listed there is children of military families. The changes there are required by the state school board for everything except for rearranges existing text to clarify school obligations, and that's strongly recommended. I can tell you that the position of the policy committee was we're going to do everything we can for military families. Why would we not make these recommendations? And so there wasn't a lot of discussion on this one.
Board members, any discussion? All right. So that one will be a consent item. Let's go to 4130.
Discretionary admission, that actually had to have a minor change because of the next policy, which is 4135, which is the tuition for discretionary admission. This was the employee policy waiving tuition. So that policy, to comply with that, you had to change. So 4130 and 4135 really go together.
Board members, Mr. Walter?
I just had a question on the employment. How does that work is there a certain time frame that they have to be employed, or is it as soon as you're employed, or is it you have to
I
remain
hate
for a
that
month?
Ms. Jones is not here because there was a lot of, that was actually one of the things we discussed quite a bit. And my understanding was she was following the state guidelines for what full employment meant, because there were all these discussions of, is it 20 hours, is it 30 hours? And essentially it comes out to 30 hours, but she said that is defined by statute and that's what we'll follow. So I know that's not a specific answer, but there were all kinds of questions floating around of, does this count, does this count? And she said, if the state says they're completely employed, it applies to them, and so we'll follow their definition. I don't know if
So
Mark
they-
wants to speak to
I
that.
think it is a right away. There was a lot of discussion about what full-time is, in other words, what versus part-time. But if you started as a full-time employee, you would be eligible immediately. In other words, there's not a waiting period. I think even if you came in mid-year from somewhere else, you would be eligible as the policy.
But if you started the year and then you left employment, but you're still.
Well, it's only, the tuition waiver only applies while you're an employee. Yeah, your question would be if you left partway through.
It just it didn't seem clear when I read through it. That's all.
Gotcha. And I'm not sure we've thought much about that question about departure as opposed to arrival. So that's a good, that may be one to think about.
Do you want to look at that item over the next month? Yeah.
Okay. Donna's going to save us all.
I don't know if I'll save us all, but the practice is we hold students harmless. That is, if we've made a decision already about a child being there because of a person's employment, and for whatever reason they leave, we hold that student harmless for the remainder of the year. So if we haven't indicated that in the policy, that's the practice.
And that's Glenda's answer, which is exactly what you just said.
So we just have
Linda and
to.
I agree.
So we just have to reference that somewhere, or
But in all of our policies for transfers or anything related like this, whether it's employees or non-employees, students are held harmless,
Okay.
provided they're meeting the criteria.
For the current year.
For the current year, because we have an annual process. Thank you, Kelly.
All right, board members, 4130 and 4135, consent? Yes, all right. 4150, school assignment.
Yes, and this, just like the last one, 4150 really goes along with 4154 because we wrote that as a local policy. So to comply with 4154, we had to tweak 4150 a little bit. And I can give you a summary. 4154 is the one that the board directed. We had essentially directed us to have a meeting about. There were Mr. Walters had some questions. I think Mr. Shoemaker, you had some. So we basically had a special meeting for that where Mr. Walter came and we discussed the concerns for that. We had about a two-hour meeting on that to address all those concerns. It was actually a really good meeting. We tightened up the policy. I think we left the meeting with a much better policy than we had when we left. And And everyone there agreed, complete consensus on all of the issues with that policy, except for one, that we had two board members present. So Mr. Harrison was present and Mr. Walter was present. Essentially, what we decided was that the schools would define what their magnet rules are, because the PLC, which is a magnet school, is very different from Patriots Elementary, which is an elementary STEM. So it's hard to write guidelines that apply to two schools that are drastically different. So everyone agreed, yes, each school will write their own. These are what the policies are going to, what their policy is going to be, their admission policies, their staying in, the school policy. And when we got to the end of that, the only disagreement from that meeting was that Mr. Walters felt like those should be board approved, that the school board should say, these are what the qualifications per school should be. And Mr. Harrison spoke up and said, I don't really think that's the role of the board. So with the two board members present, they didn't agree on, does the board approve those guidelines, or do we leave that to staff? And so we said, with no agreement on that part, we'll present that to the board and they will decide.
All right, board members, I think we can all agree that 4150 can go on the consent agenda.
I'm going to say it needs to go on action.
No, 4150.
Correct.
Which only refers to this particular.
Yeah, in my opinion, they're tied together, so I'd like to see it on action item.
Okay, well, I was just trying to get one out of the way, so we only talk about one on next week.
Sorry to do that to you, Barry.
All right.
4150 is the big one. That's
No, 4154 is the big one. 4150 only references this one. That's why I was just saying, let's just move that one along, because it has nothing to do with the discussion we're about to
they
have.
both do
There's
have
one
some.
line in red on page 2.
Right. And it doesn't reference the document that y'all were
But if we don't pass the second one, then there's no need to make the change on the first one, so they really are tied together.
That's true.
Okay. 4202.
Should we stay with 4154?
Yeah, 4154, I think you're ultimately going to, as we said, we didn't have board member agreement on that, so the board is going to have to determine what we want to move forward.
Can we go through these other ones and then go back to this?
All right, we'll continue on. We'll come back to 4154, 4202, service animals, and 5029 and 7272.
Again, service animals, all strongly recommended and essentially to comply with the Office of Civil Rights requirements for service animals in the school. So not a whole lot of discussion there except to educate people on the fact that we do have service animals and the possibility of that in our schools currently. So more of an education, but no disagreement on the policy.
Why do we have miniature horse in this policy?
Mark can talk about this, but my understanding is there's a federal lawsuit that involved that and references it, so you want to speak to that?
But do we need the verbiage? Why don't you just refer to that, whatever the reference was to it?
Well, there was a case where they challenged an exclusion on miniature horses, and the court ruled in favor of the challenge. So we previously had it worded just for dogs, and so we've changed, we've now specifically listed miniature horses. And I think that's also the recommended.
It's recommended, it's not required. It is recommended. We could eliminate it, but there is case precedent for that.
I'd like to see it eliminated and just refer to there's that reference. If you can pull it up for a second. Can you pull it up?
Yeah, I've got it up.
Is it
The policy or
the policy? Yes.
Yep, I have it.
Well, on
I'm
screen,
sorry.
I guess.
You want Chris to pull it?
That's stopped right too far. I think you've gone.
Yes, so, yes, under A, we have up now, A, except that a miniature horse will be permitted for use as a service animal, that line.
I think you just need to reference the CFR or number 20 or the 28, whatever it is, that goes over that. I don't think we need to specifically, because that just confuses the policy when we say, we're talking, this is about dogs.
So sorry, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but the point of the state recommendation, the State School Board Association's legal recommendation was to explicitly put the horse reference in here.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
It is. I guess what, Mr. Walter, are you saying what we should do is not limit it, say that it's a dog or any other animal that qualifies under 28 CFR?
It's a dog except for what will be permitted under just the reference to CFR, like just I would remove the
Okay.
miniature horse.
Board members, anybody else have a?
My only purpose here is to make it more readable and not to confuse people who read this thing and say, oh, well, here's an exception. But I mean, but anyway, that's fine.
Are there any other comments on this?
So I just want to make sure I understand, Mr. Walter, do we just take that out? Is that what the board wants us to do?
Well, I was just asking the other board members, do you want to remove this, or do you want to leave it in per our attorney's recommendation?
If I may, I'd like to suggest we accept our attorney's recommendation.
So what are we paying for?
I do think we should leave it in. I'm worried that if we take out miniature horse and just reference a service animal, we open up challenges to something other than a horse. So it's now a service donkey or something else. So I think we're trying to keep it limited. It's really always only been dogs until this court challenge that said, a miniature horse. So I think, although I understand the concern about inviting people with miniature horses, if we just say any animal under 28 CFR 35, then we might have some creative person trying to bring some other animal in. And right now we're saying it's only dogs except possibly miniature horse. So
All right, well, I'll go with
I guess
that.
that's why I
I'll
would probably.
When I read it, it confused, it raised a flag to me, but that's fine.
All right, board. Okay, so board members, are we okay with the wording in this one? Should we leave miniature horse in? Yes. Okay, so do we put this on the consent agenda based on that?
Yes.
Yes, sir, okay. All right, 5023, emergency epinephrine
Yes.
auto injector.
Again, this is recommended, and this was part of the state law and what's moved in to have EpiPens on campuses, which Ms. Smith has worked with the nurses we have a plan for that, and this complies with that. And again, we discussed that, and policy committee is good with what we have lining up with this policy.
Consent? Yes. 7420.
Superintendent contract, again, these are all strongly recommended, and they are, according to Ms. Jones, who again, I wish she was here, but she spoke to all three of these, and essentially her comment to our committee, and Mr. Harrison can speak to that, and Ms. Carpenter, I think, was there when we discussed this, was that these were all things that we already did as far as the contracts of these being out in the open, but all school districts didn't, so that this wouldn't really change anything. So she recommended all three of these, that we complied, and that they should be part of what our policy says.
All right, board members, so that's 7420, 7422, 7425, and they're saying that our past practice has been to do what is actually listed in these policies.
That was what we discussed at the committee.
Consent agenda?
I'd like to see 7420 on the action agenda, just to give me some more time to review it. It's going to be something that's pretty important in the next 2 years, I guess. We're going to be.
All right, so 7420 on the action agenda, 742225.
Can I ask, I'd like to ask the attorney, is this really what we do currently? Because I don't remember discussing assistant superintendent contracts in public. I know, I know we vote on personnel lists. We say, yeah, we're hiring this person, we're hiring that person, but I don't remember us discussing the contract details in public.
What we have done, we have voted in open session on both the superintendent contract and assistant superintendent contract, but it has usually been part of a personnel list. I think it'll still be part of a personnel list. So one thing that we've made those contracts available on request, they haven't always been formally attached to the minutes, physically attached. So I do think that now where it's going to actually have it as part of the minutes of the meeting, as opposed to simply being available when somebody asks for those contracts. But we have, I do think we've come when we have personnel actions, whether it's an administrator or assistant superintendent, we've discussed it in closed session, which you can do, and then come out to actually adopt it. So I think we can, even with this modification, I still think you may see those on a personnel list, but you're going to be voting, and we'll probably add, instead of just the person's name, we'll reference a contract date or something. We have standard form contracts, so there really isn't a lot to change. Just like teachers sign contracts, we're not attaching every contract when we approve a personnel list. So we've always voted on it in public, but I think from a record-keeping standpoint, it's kind of clarifying that when you vote yes on that person from the personnel list, it's the contract. And now the contract will actually be, attached and maybe reviewed and discussed. Again, a lot of those are fairly standardized forms, so it's not like it's a customized contract typically for each individual assistant superintendent. But we'll actually have those and attach them. So in that sense, that's a little different than what we've been doing. We've always been voting in open session and making the contracts available. Now we'll actually have that contract probably as an exhibit to the personnel list, and you'll see it and then approve it. So I'd say it's a small modification to what we're doing, just from the record-keeping standpoint, actually having those contracts with that personnel list.
Mark, the only other thing that is different on this that we have not, I don't think, done in the past is having the chair and the vice chair sign the documents. I don't think we've had the vice chair sign before, and by this one, it is saying the vice chair would sign. I think we've just had the chair sign before.
I think you're right, Ms. Carpenter. I do think that's a change too. It's been signed by the chair historically.
And
this
Ms.
is-
Jones also mentioned the same thing. That's
Yeah,
correct.
and
She said that in the
that
meeting.
is. And I think that's probably for these important contracts, probably a good protocol. And so, but you're right, that's not something we've typically done.
So I'm trying to ask this question as clearly as I can. I don't necessarily want us to get into the details of whether or not this assistant superintendent gets a car and that one doesn't get a car, down to the details of those contracts, that kind of stuff. But are we, by accepting this policy as it's written and as it's presented, how much detail is this board getting into about those contracts? You see what I'm trying to say? I'm neither saying that I want to get into that nitty-gritty or that I don't want to get into that nitty-gritty. I'm just saying what kind of detail, when it's normally a personnel list of a name being designated as a certain salary range or position, that's one thing. But in terms of all those additional contractual agreements, I'm not sure that this board should get into all those extra perks, for lack of a better word. But I want to know what this policy would obligate us to do going forward.
We've moved towards a lot of standardization on terms for assistant superintendents, so you're not going to see huge variation, but they will, unlike in the past where you may have looked at some of those issues at an initial hire, but then you would simply renew the contract each time in a action on a personnel list. I do now, under this provision, you're going to have that full contract, which would have whatever, if there's a travel allowance or something else in that, that'll be in that, and that contract will be attached. And those are already publicly available. All administrative contracts are available for someone that asked for it, but now it'll actually be attached to the minutes and the board. You'll see that, for each person. And again, a lot of that language, we've made an effort working with your superintendent for human resources to have pretty standardized terms so you don't have a lot of customization. So a lot of those contracts are going to be pretty similar in terms of language that we've crafted that go in those contracts. The superintendent contract's one that tends to be negotiated maybe a little different than the others. So a lot of the others.
And all I'm trying to say is, to be consistent, I would hope that this board would be privy to the details of the superintendent's contract, but that the superintendent's agreements with his staff would be worked out at a non-board level, is generally what my thinking is.
I think they'd be worked out, but now you will be approving the full contract with all the provisions in it would be part of what you'd be adopting or extending each time under this policy.